Welcome back to Podcast Royal. The Royals are back to work, and we have got a lot to talk about today. We've got a stacked episode. But first, and most importantly, how are you today, Jessica?
I am doing wonderful. It's so good to catch up with you again and our listeners and have another chat. How's your week going?
It's good. Okay, so you know how I'm traveling all over God's creation right now. So I'm in Fairhope, Alabama right now, which is this kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It's so idyllic. It's a resort kind of town. It's not the beach, but it's on the bay, so it's on the water. It's where the Grand Hotel is for Southerners that might be familiar. And I have lived in Alabama for over 10 years and I've never been to Fairhope and I love it. It's absolutely beautiful. And then I'll go to the beach this weekend and then back to Birmingham for a little bit, then New Orleans. So the fun continues, but it's coming to a close. But I always like, because I want to look back on these episodes and say, okay, where was I on September 12th, 2023? And the answer is Fairhope. So I am enjoying the journey and I'm doing well. And we've got, like I said, we've got a lot to talk about. Royals are back to work. We are still continuing a couple of our segments that we introduced during the summer break. Those will eventually fade out, but we're still doing them. And I think this is going to be a great episode.
Absolutely. I have actually been to Fairhope. I went several years ago, went through there for a little wedding, and I remember seeing some of the little antique shops. I think I went in a few. So a very cute little town, but I'm excited to see you when you get back here.
Yes,
We'll
I'll be
get
back
together
next
again.
week.
Well, let's go ahead and jump into this episode. I know we've got a lot of information to cover. So we're coming back with our bit of British segment today because I wanted to play a little game. And I don't know that this is so much bit of British as bit of royal, which is fitting for the podcast, I guess. But I thought it would be fun if we played a version of this or that, but royal themed. So
Okay.
here's what we're going to do. I'm going to read two options and then we'll each pick which one of the two we like the best or we would prefer. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So
I'm down.
let's go. First, Sandringham Estate or Balmoral Estate?
Ooh. Well, I've heard they make you get on the scale in front of everybody at Sandringham. So for that reason alone, I'll say Balmoral. Or do we have to give a reason or are we just like rapid firing?
Just rapid fire. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm going to say Balmoral too, just because I think it looks like a really pretty castle. So.
Yeah. And all the Highland, I've been to the Scottish Highlands and it's gorgeous.
Okay. Royal Ascot or Wimbledon?
Wimbledon, because I like tennis better than horse racing.
I'm going Royal Ascot because it looks like a really fun time and I love the hats and the outfits.
Yeah. From a fashion perspective, I would for sure say Ascot for sure.
Okay. A royal jubilee or a royal wedding?
Well, that would depend on whose wedding it is. If I don't know who they are, if they're like an obscure royal, probably, I mean, but Jubilees are so historic. I don't know. I mean, if it was William and Kate's wedding, that, or Harry and Meghan's wedding, that, but that's tough. I don't know. What would you say?
I don't know. This is a tough one for me. I'm thinking about it from like a member of the public. You know, if I were to be in London at the time, what do I think would be more exciting? I think we might get a better chance of royal sightings perhaps at a jubilee.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. I get, man, that's
Well,
tough.
that's a good
Weddings are
point. That's a
always
good
fun.
point. Well, are we inside the church at the royal wedding, or are we just
No.
Okay, then a jubilee, because yeah, you're going to see a lot more outside, like at a jubilee, than you would at a wedding. All you'd see at a wedding is people like coming in and out of the church. So
Okay, I'll go with Jubilee as well.
okay.
All right, next, William's favorite chocolate biscuit cake or Kate's favorite curry?
Those are two very different dishes. Well, at the moment, I would say chocolate biscuit cake, but ask me later, and I might say curry.
I'm going with curry. As much as I love chocolate and digestive biscuits, I am a curry girl. I actually made some this week. So
Did you really? Yum.
good. All right. Corgis or English Cocker Spaniels, which listeners, you guys know Corgis is for the Queen and English Cocker Spaniels is the Prince and Princess of Wales dog.
I mean, how could I be a royal podcaster and not say corgi? So, in honor of Her Late Majesty's 1 year anniversary, I'm going with corgi.
I'm going to say English Cocker Spaniel only because I can't help but think back of that photo of, I think it might have been Ella that James
Mhm.
Middleton posted, and she had the little British handkerchief tied around her face, and it was
Yes, I mean there are a lot of these I would choose both if I had the choice, but I'm trying to be just more decisive in my life. So,
okay. Catherine Walker or Amelia Wickstead?
ooh, that's tough too. I but Amelia Wickstead.
I'm going to say I was very torn on this one. I like them both. They're both great, but I'm also going to go Amelia Wickstead.
Mhm.
All right. Adelaide Cottage or Frogmore Cottage?
Well, listeners are going to think that this is William and Kate versus Harry and Meghan, which is not the intent of the
No, no,
question.
no, 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 no. That only the house.
Well, I mean, I haven't really seen the interiors of either, but I'll go, you know what? I've heard that Frogmore is a bit more revamped and modernized, so I'm gonna say Frogmore.
That's what I'm thinking too. I'm going to go with Frogmore. I think Adelaide, from what they've described, it is, I mean, I don't think it's teeny tiny, but I think it's small compared to some of the other homes and maybe to
Mhm.
Frogmore. So I think I'm going to go with Frogmore.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Wearing a tiara or riding in a royal state coach?
Wearing a tiara, because I've heard that that is a rough ride in the royal stagecoach. So wearing a tiara for sure.
I think it would be a great experience to ride in the state coach, but I would never turn down an opportunity to wear a tiara.
Yeah, are you kidding? Oh my God, no. So tiara for sure.
Alrighty. So Queen Elizabeth's favorite gin and Dubonnet or the Princess of Wales' favorite spicy margarita?
Spicy margarita, baby, all day long.
I'm going with the gin. I like a gin and tonic. I'm not a huge margarita person, so I'm going with a gin. Okay, last one. Meeting a royal on a walkabout or spending a night at Buckingham Palace, but you don't meet a royal?
Oh, that's a good question. Spending a night at Buckingham Palace because the meeting would take like probably literally 2 seconds because that's how long they spend with each person on a walkabout. And spending a whole night at the palace? Are you kidding? Just roaming around the halls and looking at everything. That's my choice.
Me too. That's what I was thinking. I could not imagine. I mean, I would want to experience room service at the palace.
Oh
I
yeah.
want to wander the hallways and just be in awe by how beautiful the place is. I'm going with a night at the palace as well, even if I don't get to meet a royal.
Well, as long as they don't put me in Andrew's creepy old room with his little teddy bears and stuff, then I'll be satisfied. Well, that was fun. Okay, we should do stuff like that more often. That makes me
Yeah.
think.
And I also want to know, like, if listeners were playing along, if you disagreed with anything or if you have thoughts, let us know. And
If
we
you're
want
really
to
passionate
as well.
about your spicy margarita or your gin and Dubonnet, then let us know. All right. Well, we've got some things to talk about in Royal Rundown. We have everybody's back to work and it's busy. So let's start, shall we, at the Well Child Awards. So the Well Child Awards were the night before the first anniversary of the late Queen's death. Prince Harry was there. Prince Harry's been a patron of Well Child for, I think, 15 years. And while he was at the event, he said that the Queen was looking down on all of us. A lot of things this week have centered around September 8th and the 1 year anniversary. And you know what? It was poignant, it was well handled, but it wasn't as big of like, and not saying that it wasn't a big deal, but it wasn't like maybe as flashy as I thought it would be. Like it just seemed understated, and maybe that's exactly what they wanted it to be. But King Charles released a statement from Balmoral not long after midnight on the 8th about his mother. It was released alongside a previously unreleased beautiful photo of Her Late Majesty taken by Cecil Beaton at Buckingham Palace on October 16th of 1968. So that would have made the Queen about 42 years old.
Yes, I saw that photo. And in his statement, the king said, in marking the first anniversary of Her Late Majesty's death and my accession, we recall with great affection her long life, devoted service, and all she meant to so many of us. I am deeply grateful too for the love and support that has been shown to my wife and myself during this year as we do our utmost to be of service to you all. So, traditions on September 8th included ringing of bells at Westminster Abbey in honor of the King's Accession Day. There was a 21-gun salute in the Royal Parks of London as a gesture of respect. And we also saw the King and Queen attend church service at Balmoral on Friday. And Charles wore a traditional Scottish kilt to the service. And I know you saw this, Rachel. He appeared to be pretty emotional when he left the
Mhm.
church.
Yeah, I mean, and who wouldn't be? I think Accession Day is so strange because it's like in Charles's case, it's the moment that he's been waiting for what, nearly 74 years at that point. But it also hinges on the death of his beloved mother. Like there's no like that must be the like strangest confluence in the mind, just such a juxtaposition of what you've been working for your whole life and the saddest thing that's ever happened to you all at once.
We also saw Princess Eugenie released a never before seen photo of her and her grandmother on Instagram, and she included a message that said, "Thinking of you today, missing you so much, but remembering what a life of service, love, and dedication to everyone and to your family who loved you so very much. Forever grateful to you and always in my heart."
Well, we knew that Harry was going to be in the UK because we knew he was going to be at the Well Child Awards on September 7th. And I've been wondering, I'm sure a lot of you were wondering, how is Harry going to mark this? Because Charles and Camilla are at Balmoral, and William and Catherine were in Scotland. We'll talk about them in a second. But Harry stepped out in London to visit the late Queen's burial site at Windsor Castle. I also heard that Beatrice and Eugenie joined him, which I was honestly so happy to hear. I really was glad that he wasn't alone. I didn't want, because Meghan was still in California at the time. She just landed in Germany today, Tuesday. But William and Kate, as I mentioned, attended a church service, or I'm sorry, they weren't in Scotland, they were in Wales at St. David's Cathedral. Excuse my mistake. Commemorating the first anniversary of Her late Majesty's death. Kate wore a pair of the late Queen's pearl and diamond earrings. She's been wearing those earrings a lot lately, including to the funeral back in September. And it was very moving to see. And during the service, Kate placed a bouquet of white flowers at a portrait of the Queen. In the portrait, the Queen was wearing a white gown and a tiara, and William and Kate stood before the photo. In a really poignant moment of silence, they looked visibly moved. I started to get visibly moved myself when Kate actually curtsied to the portrait of the Queen, which like that makes me emotional. Like even talking, sorry, like it's yeah, her death, obviously, listeners, you've heard me on the air last year, obviously very much moved me. And I just thought it was such a beautiful sign of respect when Kate curtsied to the photo, even though obviously the Queen is not with us in physical body. The event at St. David's Cathedral was called an act of reflection for Accession Day. It included prayers in both English and Welsh. And William and Kate later posted to social media. They wrote, "A moment of reflection at St. David's Cathedral, honoring Her late Majesty and all that she did for communities like this around the UK, the Commonwealth, and the world." And then, of course, that weekend, the 9th and 10th of September, as we mentioned in last week's episode, William and Kate actually both went to France to watch some rugby. But then there was another tie into rugby that happened over the weekend that we, or at least I, was not expecting.
Yeah, I know. So it felt like, the Royals they're back at work. They've got a lot going on this week. And to your point, I did not expect a little surprise we got. We had a guest visit by Princess Anne and the Prince and Princess of Wales on Mike Tindall's podcast, The Good, the Bad, and the Rugby.
That is a hell of a group right there. Mike Tindall and William and Kate. That is that is like a dinner party right there.
Well, I've already listened to the episode. I'm sure many of our podcast listeners have as well. And to your point, Rachel, I loved this pairing of William, Catherine, Princess Anne, and Mike. And I was wondering, how did all this come about? Do you think Mike brought it up at a dinner with the royals and they started chatting and agreed to go on? I'm not really sure.
Well, it
But
all
either
centers
way,
around rugby because Anne, William, and Kate all have patronages around rugby. And of course, Mike is like Mr. Rugby. So
Right. Yeah. I'm sure they connected the dots that way. I'm just wondering how the conversation came about. But it was really fun to listen to. And if I'm being honest, I have to admit, I was sort of expecting it to be a little bit boring. But I
Mm,
was really pleasantly surprised.
it was not boring.
I'm not a big rugby fan, and but I am a big podcast fan and I am a big royal fan. So the
Mhm.
pros outweighed the cons, and I gave it a listen and I was really glad, and sounded like you did as well.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was, I mean, just the anecdote alone that Kate plays beer pong was like enough for me. And I really enjoyed it. And by the way, I'm sitting in a chair here in Fairhope that is so loud and squeaky. So listeners, if you like, that's me like shifting in the chair. So I'm sorry if that picks up on the mic, but I digress anyway. But yes, I listened. It was a lot of fun.
So I had two favorite lines from the show. The first was pretty early on in the conversation when Prince William, in reference to playing sports, talked about people needing to learn how to lose well.
Yeah, I
He
like
mentioned
that.
he mentioned the importance of learning to lose and being a good loser, but also being a humble winner. And I think he is so right. Losing at something at some point in life is inevitable for everyone. And
Mhm.
in this age where every kid gets a trophy, it doesn't really prepare children for real life and how to manage your emotions when you do lose.
Mhm.
And I've thought a lot about that myself. And so I thought it was really interesting to hear his perspective on that.
I've learned more from my losses than I ever have from my wins. So
Me too. And I also really loved when Catherine addressed all of the speculation by the public that she's competitive. And she said, I'm really not that competitive. I don't really know where all this has come
well,
from.
she was totally
And
joking when she said that. I
see,
don't I
I
don't think I think she was joking.
I think there was a little bit of a joke there. But I also feel like that's something I've thought a lot about because, the public, royal reporters, we all put this, blanket characteristics on Catherine and others kind of based on small glimpses we get into time, whether they're, at an engagement or they're
Mhm.
doing something where they're maybe acting a little bit for the camera. And so I don't think that those are always depictions, accurate depictions of their everyday life. So I was kind of glad that she did mention that, it's sort of like they're living in this, I guess, a fishbowl where everybody's kind of looking at them and we're making assumptions based off of just little bits and pieces of what we see.
Mhm.
But you're right. They were joking a little bit there, and I'm sure she is competitive at things at certain times. But I also feel like she's probably just a normal person and she likes to have a good time and play along,
Mhm.
with the fun. Again, I loved Mike's personality. I think
Mhm.
he's so down to earth. I think he's easy to get along with, and I think he really complements the family very well. And to your point, when they were kidding about being competitive, she said she's not competitive at all. And then Mike says, "I've seen her play beer pong." So, like you said, the Princess of Wales plays beer pong, or she has at some point, anyway.
Man, I would pay to see that. And when I loved the part when I think William said that when he was in school, he enjoyed playing rugby. And then Kate was like, did you really? Like basically calling him out on that. And I love their dynamic as a couple. And it was just a great episode. Listeners, if you have not listened, it's the podcast is called The Good, the Bad, and the Rugby. I'm pretty sure that this is William and Kate's first joint podcast appearance. I mean, they've had very sparingly have been on podcasts solo, but I'm pretty sure they've never done it as a couple. So it was
Yeah.
great fun.
Yeah, no, it was a great listen for sure.
Well, switching gears, so the sixth iteration of Prince Harry's Invictus Games kicked off on Saturday in Dusseldorf, Germany. By the way, I did end up finishing Heart of Invictus, and all I have to say is, wow, that is powerful content right there. It is a hard watch in terms of it's a very emotional watch, but it is absolutely worth the watch. It's so good, and Harry and all of the Invictus team should be so proud. So Harry arrived in Dusseldorf on Friday after his visit to St. George's Chapel, and the games kicked off on Saturday the 9th. So, for those that don't know, and if you're listening to this podcast, I'm not sure how that's possible, but the Invictus Games were founded in 2014 by Harry as a multi sport event for wounded, injured, and sick servicemen and servicewomen, both of whom are currently serving, and veterans. And we'll give the full report on the Invictus Games next week when the games end. They're still going on right now on September 12th. They wrap up on Saturday, September 16th. But they seem to be off to a good start. Meghan arrived in Dusseldorf today, Tuesday, around 4:40 p.m. local time. She had a really long day. She was actually spotted, of all places, at an In-N-Out in Montecito yesterday, which I have you ever been to In-N-Out? I love In-N-Out, by the way.
I have been, yeah. It's been a few years, but I was out west on a work trip and went there, and it was pretty good.
Oh man, they're getting one. I think they're getting one in Nashville. Like this is In-N-Out listeners. I mean, I'm sure you are aware, but it's just a great burger, great fast food burger, and it's mostly on the West Coast, but it's starting to trickle other places too. Anyway, Meghan left LAX around 6 p.m. local time yesterday, the 11th, and flew through London. So you know what I thought? I wonder if she stopped at the Windsor Suite that we talked about the other week during her brief 90-minute layover at Heathrow. I mean, honestly, she probably did. And so I find that very interesting. I have no confirmation of this, but I mean, just like William and Kate, Meghan can't just sit. Well, I don't know. Maybe she was flying private. I'm really not sure. All I do know is that she was there for 90 minutes in London. And then she landed in Dusseldorf. And you know what? I'm telling you, she was traveling for like 24 hours to get there, changing a million time zones. And then within 2 or 3 hours of touching down in Dusseldorf, she was on stage alongside Harry at a private reception for athletes and their family and friends tonight. Or Dusseldorf is a few hours ahead. It's the next day. It's the 13th there now. But I seriously think that she had to be so jet lagged, in respect there. But fun side note, Meghan did her own hair and makeup for the event. She wore a Banana Republic dress, and she explained why she was a couple of days late to the party. That's kind of been in the media, like, why is Meghan not there the whole time? But and late to the party are her words, actually Meghan's words. And she told the crowd that she was with their kids, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet, doing school drop off and the like, which of course is incredibly understandable. So again, we'll have a full report on the games next episode, since they're still ongoing. But very interested to see what Meghan will do for Harry's 39th birthday on Friday the 15th. I know that it will be meaningful either way. I just kind of hope we find out about it. Like, I hope she does like some big surprise, because I don't think his birthday's ever been. This is the 6th Invictus Games, and I don't think his birthday's ever been during the games before.
Mhm.
And by the way, the Invictus Games have played a pretty significant part in Harry and Meghan's love story. They publicly debuted their romance at the 2017 games in Toronto. If you'll remember, how could you forget? Actually, that was on my birthday. That was on September
Mm.
25th of 2017. And how old was I? I was turning 31 that day. And then by the time, if just to show you what a year can do, by the time of the 2018 games in October of 2018 in Sydney, they were married, and Meghan was pregnant with Archie. So a lot can happen in a year. And she was also present for the 2022 games in The Hague, Netherlands. She introduced her husband before he took to the stage. That was captured in Heart of Invictus. And so, as I said, this is the 6th iteration of the games, the 4th one since Harry and Meghan became a couple. And Meghan has been present at every single one of them. The first two competitions were held in London in 2014, in Orlando in May of 2016, with the latter occurring just 1 month before Harry and Meghan met. So, in addition to the end of the Invictus Games on Saturday, when we record next week, William will be at the end of his New York City visit, and Charles and Camilla will be setting off for France the next day. So everyone is busy. Everybody's back.
Well, they are both super busy with this event. I still have not finished watching Heart of Invictus, so that is on my list to wrap up. I did see some photos of Meghan traveling from California to Dusseldorf today as well. Really, really a long trip. So
It's a long day.
yeah, so we'll be following along with the Invictus Games, like you said.
Yes. And so yesterday, we were again recording on the 12th. So yesterday was September 11th, which marked 22 years, unbelievably, since the terrorist attacks on that day here in the US that shook the world. And I actually never knew this. I don't know how it's been 22 years and I'm just now learning this, but Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York, was actually in New York City on September 11th. I want to know, Jessica, if you knew this, because I never knew this until
Oh,
yesterday.
I did not know this.
So her first meeting of the day was an interview with Matt Lauer at NBC Studios back then. If you all remember, Matt Lauer was an anchor on the Today Show with Katie Couric. And Fergie was then due to head to the North Tower of the World Trade Center for a meeting. She was supposed to be on the 101st floor of that tower when the first plane ended up striking the tower at 8:46 a.m. But she got caught up in traffic. She got caught up in New York City traffic, and because of the traffic, she was delayed 20 minutes. She was running late. And
Wow.
she was due there for a meeting with a charity that she was involved with called Chances for Children. But again, because of the traffic, she wasn't in the tower. And the traffic and that 20-minute delay, like talk about sliding doors moments, like just, you know, you never know when the traffic delay or the inconvenience, who knows what that is protecting you from. But anyway, her delay in traffic potentially saved her life. So Chances for Children rented space on the 101st floor from Cantor Fitzgerald. It's a financial firm. And thankfully, no one from the charity died on 9/11, but 700 employees from Cantor Fitzgerald were killed. I think Cantor Fitzgerald, grand total, as an organization, had more deaths that day on 9/11 as an organization than almost any other. And I even remember that from the coverage 22 years ago. And I mean, this gives me goosebumps again, how close of a call this was. And, as does the story that Fergie shared from that day. By the way, Fergie is just a treasure trove of stories, isn't she? Like I miss Tea Talks already because of all,
Yeah.
like every week it was a new anecdote. But here's another anecdote for you about that day at 9/11. This story is so moving. So before September 11th, Fergie had designed a new mascot for the charity. It was a rag doll that she called Little Red, and the rag doll had red hair and orange and white dress. So the original Little Red was sitting on Fergie's desk at the office when 9/11 happened, when the attack occurred. And after the attack, as Fergie was watching footage on TV of the North Tower, which of course eventually collapsed, she spotted the little doll amidst the rubble. And she said, this is a quote from Fergie. She said, when it came on TV, I looked and saw Little Red, and the presenter said, oh, look, there's a child's doll. And I immediately called up the presenter and said, please don't worry. And this is Fergie talking to the BBC back in 2014. Back to Fergie, she said, because I was so worried they would think that a child was lost or buried in the rubble because it was a child's doll. And back to Fergie, she said, so I said, no, it's not a child's doll. It's Little Red. She is a symbol for Chances for Children. So actually, Little Red is now a part of the September 11th memorial exhibit at Ground Zero. I have no idea how I didn't know this, but I don't know how I didn't know this. You said you didn't know it either?
No, I mean, my goodness, what a story.
Yeah, and actually, to further, drive home the point, Prince Andrew, her ex-husband, was flying from the UK to Atlanta. His plane got turned back, of course, because they grounded all of the planes that day, and he was trying to reach. I mean, they were divorced by then. I think they'd been divorced for 5 years in 2001, and he was trying to reach her. He couldn't get a hold of her, and he knew that she was in New York City and supposed to be at the World Trade Center that day. So, can you imagine how terrifying that must have been, and to their daughters? And so I just again want to just make mention that we remember September 11th, that feeling that Andrew felt, probably the pit of his stomach dropped. It turned out fine for them, but it did not for so many. And so, my every September 11th, my mind goes to those that lost a loved one, and just one of the worst days in American history. So we remember on Podcast Royal, we remember 9/11.
Yes, absolutely. And I didn't know any of that about
I
her
know.
experience.
I know. And apparently she was talking about it on the BBC in 2014. So it's not new news. It's been out there, but I just didn't know it.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. That was super, super interesting. And also, as you said, heartbreaking every year. I remember the date, and you just don't forget where you were when that happened, and you feel that heartbreak for all of the people who were lost and all the families who lost loved ones that day.
Mm-hmm.
I want to mention an engagement the Prince of Wales did this past week. So we're all familiar with Prince William's passion for ending homelessness. As a reminder, this summer he actually launched his 5-year campaign Homewards to tackle this issue, and he pledged £3 million from the Royal Foundation toward the cause. So he came out of his summer holiday back at it, where he visited I'm going to say Pret-A-Manger, which I think is
Have
probably
you
the
ever been
American
to a
way.
Pret? Wait a minute, wait a minute. Have you ever been to a Pret? Pret has the best little sandwiches. Oh my gosh, they're everywhere, all over London anyway. I can't speak for the rest of the UK, but
Well, I was going to say, I think I've seen maybe a few in New York City. We definitely don't have them here.
and they're so good. I wish we did have them everywhere. Just like In and Out, this needs to become ubiquitous. I need one.
Well, every time I see it, I want to say Pret-A-Manger because I'm learning
That's not
French
it.
on
No,
Duolingo. Well, that
no.
it's the French pronunciation,
Well,
but
it's the
we'll stick with
Pret.
the American. So he visited Pret-A-Manger in Bournemouth. And for listeners who don't know, Rachel just said it a little bit, but it is a London food-based chain. It's kind of like a grab-and-go sandwich and coffee shop. They've got organic coffee, pastries, salads, sandwiches, soup, seasonal beverages, you
Good
name it.
stuff. Seriously, good sandwiches.
And William popped in to spend time there and hear about what the company is doing to support ending homelessness. So they've got a Rising Stars campaign where they hire individuals who are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless, and they hire them and train them with the goal of helping them avoid or escape their homelessness. They're really expecting the program to grow significantly over the next few years, and Prince William experienced employment with the company firsthand. So he put on an apron and he popped into the kitchen to help prepare coffee and sandwiches. Did you see that, Rachel?
I did. And like, how would you feel if you were just walking into the Pret and you're like bleary eyed? It's like 6 a.m. and there's Prince William making your coffee or making your sandwich.
Yeah, it looked like a fun day. I like seeing him do stuff like this. And one more detail I want to mention about the engagement. So the location he visited was in Bournemouth, which is one of the 6 locations that they've selected to participate in the Homewards 5-year initiative to receive benefits. Each of the locations will receive £500,000 to be applied to specialty housing projects. So a really cool little outing he had that day.
I love that. And we're going to talk in a minute about Kate's outing today. That was also very interesting, potentially even more interesting than that. But before we do that, so this past Friday, 3 of Princess Diana's gowns sold at auction for $1.62 million. 3 gowns, by the way, for $1.62 million. These 3 dresses were a part of Julian's Auctions and Turner Classic Movies presents Legends, Hollywood and Royalty. This was held both online and in Beverly Hills. And the 3 items shown, which were for the most part worn in 1991. They were a scarlet, you will recognize these, listeners, the scarlet red silk Bruce Oldfield gown. There was a black silk velvet and white silk crepe strapless gown by the aforementioned at the top of the show, Catherine Walker, who was a favorite of Diana's, is now a favorite of Kate's. And a final look from Catherine Walker, which was an off-the-shoulder black, I do not know how to say that word, Faille, we'll just say that, bodice and draped jade silk skirt. Interestingly, Camilla wore Bruce Oldfield to the coronation. That's who designed her coronation look. And as I just said, Kate wears Catherine Walker all the time. And I love this story as we start to get towards the end of the royal rundown, although we do have a really interesting Kate engagement that just happened today. But listeners, if you are in London during the holidays, I am jealous of you. So none other than our friend and the potential love of my life, Peter Phillips, has created this thing called ICE at Kensington Palace, where the helipad at Kensington Palace is going to be transformed into get this, the UK's largest ever outdoor ice rink, and it will be open to the public this winter. I'm jealous. Like I mean, there's no way I'm going to be able to pull this off, but I hope this becomes an annual tradition, because this is like a bucket list thing if it is. But tickets for general access and a 45-minute skating session currently they're only $20, so it's super affordable, and it will be open from November 30th to January 7th of next year. And by the way, I need to redeem KP, because I don't remember if I said this on the podcast, but when I went to Kensington Palace last summer of 2022, I think it was now I know it was probably the early stages of COVID, but I got so sick at Kensington Palace. Like I'm talking, like I spent the whole time in the bathroom, like puking. We were going to, my friend and I were at this exhibit of royal photos, and it was like, she was much less into the royals than me, and I was so excited to be there, and I was in the bathroom the entire time. So I need to go back to KP and like redeem the experience. But
Wow.
anyway,
Way
yeah.
to puke at the palace.
You know
Oh.
what? I just wanted to leave my mark. I just wanted to leave my mark at the palace. I've never been so sick. And then I ended up getting COVID in Scotland and it was just a mess. And anyway, but I need to go back and ice skate at KP to make up for that horrible, honestly, truly horrible experience. And it wasn't because of Kensington Palace, it was because of my body. But anyways, the rink can accommodate up to 750 people per day. Is that not the most fun idea you've ever heard? I have no idea how Peter Phillips came up with this or why, but I think it's brilliant.
Yes, $20 isn't bad for skating for 45 minutes, and I would definitely do this.
I know,
I've been
right?
ice skating at Rockefeller Center in New York City, and that was
Ooh,
really
that's fun. I've been ice skating a couple times, but never anywhere that exciting. It was like in Kansas City at some ice rink somewhere.
fun. Well, let's jump into the story about the Princess of Wales. So, like you said, she had an interesting engagement today. She visited a prison, and I don't know about you, but I thought this was really different and unexpected. So, we see her do a lot of work with babies and young children and mothers, and she's even visited a women's prison in the past. But I feel like we don't see her do a lot of events centered on adult prison environments for men.
Mhm.
So, when I saw this pop up this morning, my first thought was, does this somehow tie into her shaping us work in some way? And if so, how? Okay, listeners, she went in her role as patron of the Forward Trust, and she visited HMP Highdown, which is a Category C prison located in Surrey. And if you aren't familiar, Category A would be a high security prison, followed by B, and then C, which is fairly low security. If you go even lower than that, you have Category D, which is more like an open prison. So the people there would have permission to go off site for work and education during the day. But
Do
she
not
was
say we
in
don't ever
Category.
teach you anything on Podcast Royal. Now you know all about the UK prison system. So there you have it.
She was at Category C, and she was there meeting with prisoners who are battling with addiction. So she was learning about how the Forward Trust supports prisoners going through that addiction journey, and she actually got to walk through the process a family might go through when they're paying a visit to someone in prison, and she experienced the security protocols and what that might be like, for anyone who wants to check in on a loved one. So the prison's been making efforts to really improve the visitation experience for families. While she was there, she also met with incarcerated prisoners to learn about their journeys with addiction and the programs they're going through to really overcome their battles. The Ford Trust is also making efforts to stop the cycle of addiction and the negative impact that it has within families and future generations. So one of their programs is called Family Ties, and it's focused on rebuilding trust within families that, is often broken when you have someone struggling with addiction. So that was really the gist of her visit. She also visited the Clink, which is an on-site restaurant at the prison. And at the restaurant there, they're training prisoners on hospitality, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, and the
But
clink, of course, is like a nickname for prison. So I think that's
yes,
pretty like they are in on the joke. I think that's pretty cool.
for sure. Yeah. So back to what I mentioned at the beginning, none of the news articles I read about this engagement that, this morning as it came out specifically called out her Shaping Us campaign. But after I really read about the engagement, to me, I think it's really easy to see how this ties into her other work. We know she and Prince William have done a lot to focus on mental health awareness and resources for the public. So I see how this engagement relates to that, as well as the well-being of children under 5 who, maybe they're separated from a parent because of addiction and imprisonment. So I think if there's work to be done, to help lower addiction rates and provide children in these situations more support, and she's going to focus on that work, I think it does really connect back to Shaping Us, as well as William's Homewards campaign and what he's doing around homelessness. I think they all kind of tie in together very well.
And I remember when she first married William back in 2011, addiction work was one of the first causes she took on. So this has been something that she's been interested in for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, this was really interesting. And I hope that offering prisoners who are struggling with addiction the opportunity to meet and engage with the princess really gives them some encouragement and hope in their journey to recovery. I feel like that would just be to me, I would think a really hopeful experience for someone. So when I saw photos of Catherine today, though, Rachel, something very interesting caught my eye, and I'm not sure if you saw it, but two of her fingers were taped up from an injury. Did you see?
I did that. And on Getty, which is our photo service, there were like 3 pictures specifically zoomed in on the bandage on her hand.
So in case anyone was wondering, it wasn't from playing tennis, and no, it was not from playing beer pong. But it was reported that she was playing on the trampoline at home with her kids and she injured her finger, but they said it was nothing serious. But, yeah, hey, that's real life. You break a toe or you bend a finger and you've got to go to work the next day. So you tape it up.
Well, I wrote a story about this morning, and I think the lead that I wrote was like, here's 3 things I did not expect on my royal bingo card today. Kate at a prison, Kate's hand is hurt, and she also debuted curtain bangs today. So there was
Right.
there was sorry, there was a lot going on this morning. Her first visit to a men's prison, her injured hand, her new curtain bangs. Okay, I would love to know your thoughts on the curtain bangs. What do we think of the curtain bangs?
Okay. I don't love curtain bangs, and I don't know if it's part of it, maybe. So I thought she looked great, and I thought they looked great on her. Curtain bangs are kind of fringy. They're a little bit more, I don't know, like, what's the word? I don't know if modern is the word, or more just kind of like laid back,
I
maybe
think
like
they're
more
kind
of
of
a casual
retro.
feel.
Like they remind me of the 70s.
Yeah, good point. Yes, retro. I think the word I'm looking for is more laid back, which is a little bit different to like maybe a buttoned up look that you might think you would see on a princess. But also I feel like maybe this is me secretly hoping that this trend doesn't catch on, because bangs are not for me. My
Same,
hairdresser
same,
actually
same.
told me she would not give me bangs because I guess they just don't do for my face what they would do for others. So I'm like, please don't let this trend catch on. But I thought she looked great. It was a little bit different. I tend to like, a little bit more of the polished hairstyles. I love her updos. I know some of that can be a little bit stuffy and not appropriate for all of the events. But what were your thoughts?
Well, first of all, Kate does bangs every few years, and I also learned the hard way that bangs are not for me. And like the thing about bangs is once you cut bangs, you really can't, like, kind of
You're
can't.
in for the long
Yeah,
haul.
you can't get out of it until it grows back. So I've learned that the hard way. But again, it looks great on her. It's not for me, but also I really like this color that she's got going on. She, again, it was curled, like it was giving me very, like, very, I'm watching the show on HBO. Listeners, I don't know if any of you are watching too. It's very, like, totally opposite from Royals, but it's called Winning Time. It's about the LA Lakers in the 80s, and it's giving me very, like, Winning Time hair vibes, like from the 70s, the 80s. But Kate pulls it off, and apparently, according to Hello, which I read today, this is the new it girl hairstyle. So I guess I'm just not going to be an it girl because that's not going to happen. But no, I mean, I thought she looked beautiful. It wouldn't work for me, but I also want to make mention of her outfit. So Sarah Burton, who is the creative director at Alexander McQueen, many of you will recognize that name because she designed Kate's wedding dress, which of course is like probably one of the top 3 most iconic fashion pieces of our lifetime. Sarah Burton announced yesterday that she is stepping down after 26 years at Alexander McQueen. I think she spent almost all, if not all, of her career at McQueen. And so after Lee Alexander McQueen, who of course founded the house, after he died in February 2010, I think. So then Sarah Burton took over as creative director in May of 2010, and then of course, if you can do the math, then less than a year later she was designing Kate's wedding dress. So that's a lot at all at once, to take over as creative director, design a dress that's looked on by everybody in the entire world. But anyway, all of that to say that Kate wore McQueen today, that her outfit was, their blue suit was McQueen. So I'm thinking that's kind of like a subtle nod to Sarah Burton. Like, thank you,
Maybe
Sarah,
so.
for all you've done. Again, I thought she looked stunning. You mentioned this. I loved the photos of her having to go through security. She had to get sniffed out just like the rest of us would by a black lab named Penny to make sure that she didn't have any drugs on her, which, like, speaking of like airports and things like that, which we've been talking about within the past few episodes. I mean, Kate and William don't have to go through airport security, or at least not like the rest of us do. So it was interesting to see her like have that really relatable moment. So I also want to make mention that she had her GCL necklace on. I think it's by Daniela Draper. I love that necklace with their initials on it. So so there's our royal rundown. That was a full one. We haven't had one like that in a while.
Right, I know. Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since we discovered Spotify for Podcasters, we have had so much fun trying out all of the features like Q&As and polls that let us be really creative and engage with our audience. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Well, let's hop into segment 3, which is listener Q&A. We got a good listener question this week from Vicky, and she writes, "Hello, ladies of Podcast Royal. Hope you are both doing well. Here's my question, which I hope makes sense since I had a thought about it in my head before writing this. As we all know, the other members of the royal family, who are the Duke of Kent, the Duke of Gloucester, am I saying that right? Gloucester? Gloucester, thank you. Princess Alexandra and Prince Michael of Kent, they're getting up there in age. When the inevitable happens to them, God forbid, do you think their kids would be working royals in their place, or would they step in on occasion like Lady Gabriella did when she went to King Constantine's funeral for Prince William back in January of this year? I know, as far as to my knowledge, that some of the Duke of Kent's family members aren't part of the line of succession due to religion, but would love to know your thoughts on the others and what you think would happen. Thank you for your input. If you do read this, Vicky, we read every single email, every single DM, and all the work you guys do for the podcast. Listening to you guys does make things such as chores and laundry go faster. And yes, that's including walking the dog, Vicky. Well, first of all, Vicky, thank you for the question. I had to do research on this because I'm going to be honest with you. I don't really know much about any of the people that Vicky said in her email. We don't really talk about these extended members of the royal family. I do think that I'm actually glad, Vicky, that you asked the question, because we are doing these royal deep dive things. And I don't think that's why you asked the question, but we are doing these royal deep dives on members of the family that we don't really talk about. And these would definitely be members of the family that we don't ever talk about. So I want to briefly run down who they are before I attempt to answer Vicky's question. So first of all, Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, is the first. You all know what he looks like. You've seen him on the balcony after Philip died, or when Philip retired. The Duke of Kent was a cousin of Queen Elizabeth's, and he was on the balcony with her very often. You know this guy's face. He is the first cousin of Queen Elizabeth, and he is cousin through their fathers. So interestingly, in the weird world that is royal families around the world, especially Europe, the Duke of Kent's mother is a first cousin of Prince Philip. So everyone is kind of related, kind of. So, I mean, obviously, because they're all family, but there's some extra overlap there. So because of this, the Duke of Kent is both a second cousin and a first cousin once removed to King Charles. That's just kind of irrelevant information. So the Duke of Kent is 87. He has held this title for 81 years, since he was 6 years old. His father, who is King George VI, that would be Elizabeth and Margaret's father, King George VI's younger brother, Prince George, who was Duke of Kent before his son, because the title passes, hereditarily. Prince George, not little Prince George, like 10-year-old Prince George, but Prince George of yesteryear, died in a plane crash in 1942. The Duke of Kent carried out engagements on behalf of the late Queen, the Duke of Kent, meaning the current one. And he was patron of over 140 charitable organizations. He actually had a book come out last year. It was an autobiography he wrote with Hugo Vickers, which is called A Royal Life. And his wife, Catherine, Duchess of Kent, is still alive. And so is the Duke of Kent, by the way. They're obviously both still alive. She is 90 and they had 3 children. So perhaps the most known member of this branch of the family is Lady Amelia Windsor. She is the youngest child of the Duke and Duchess of Kent. And she is a the Duke and Duchess of Kent's oldest child. We're doing I wish I could visually show you this in a family tree. But anyway, Amelia Windsor is a fashion model. She's walked for Dolce & Gabbana, kind of like Kitty Spencer. And as Vicky alluded to, her father, who is the Duke of Kent's oldest child, actually lost his succession rights because he married a Catholic woman and he took on Catholicism. So it gets a little tricky. So a lot of the members of this side of the family tree, because the royal family is head of the Church of England, if you are Catholic, then you give up your place in the line of succession. So a lot of members of this branch of the family are Catholic, and so they have thereby foregone their place in the line of succession. Okay, so now we have Prince Richard, Duke of Gloucester, and his wife Brigitte, who is Duchess of Gloucester. So the Duke is the youngest of King George V and Queen Mary's 9 grandchildren. And the Duke of Gloucester currently sits 31st in the line of succession. He is the highest in the line of succession who is not a direct descendant of King George VI, which is interesting. So he's been Duke of Gloucester since 1974. And talk about plane crashes in this family. And of course, Prince Philip's sister died in a plane crash too. He became Duke after his oldest brother, William, died in a plane crash. So, I mean, that's a little scary, but they say things come in threes. So there you go. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. So he retired from his career as an architect, Duke of Gloucester did, to become a working royal. And he is 79. So he too is getting up there in age. And he is married to Brigitte, who is Duchess of Gloucester. She is 77. And they have 3 children, including Lady Davina Windsor. Okay, so there's 2 of the 4 we're going to talk about. Then there's Princess Alexandra, the Honorable Lady Ogilvy. Sorry, I'm butchering everything today. Forgive me. She is 86 and a first cousin of Queen Elizabeth. So for context, Alexandra is the younger sister of Edward, Duke of Kent. So if you're connecting all the dots here. So at one point, she was one of the most active working royals. This was in the late 50s and early 60s, though, when you had basically the Queen and Prince Philip and kind of Margaret. I mean, Margaret was a working royal, kind of. She was more of a socialite. But all of their kids were way too young or not even born to be working royals, right? So we kind of had to pull from the trenches here. Now, because Elizabeth and Philip had 4 kids who then went on to have all these kids, you don't really need to dip into the extended family so much because the immediate family is so big. And then finally, the 3rd child of Prince George, Duke of Kent, who is the father of the current Duke of Kent. This would be much better shown visually as I'm learning quickly. But I know that all of you have probably heard of Prince Michael of Kent. So his father, again, also died in the plane crash when Michael was only 7 weeks old. So for context, his older brother, Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, I think he was 6, I said. Michael was only 7 weeks old. So Prince Michael of Kent did not undertake many royal engagements. And his wife, who is Princess Michael of Kent, is often a very controversial figure, probably most recently for wearing that brooch to that dinner that was considered very racist. So she's saying she's a controversial figure is quite honestly putting it mildly. So they have 2 children who we talk about on the show sometimes. Lord Frederick Windsor, who is married to the actress Sophie Winkleman. We bring up Sophie Winkleman sometimes because she's got really good fashion. And then Lady Gabriella Windsor, who actually Vicky talked about in her question. She is now Gabriella Kingston. She was very close to Queen Elizabeth, and she did step in. Vicky is right, for Prince William earlier this year. Okay, so finally, to Vicky's question, I don't think any descendants of the aforementioned current working royals will be working royals, and that is because King Charles' plans for a slimmed down monarchy, and also, as I said, at the time that their parents or grandparents became working royals, there was a need for them. And there really isn't a need for them now because, as I said, the descendants of Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip are far too numerous. I mean, not even all of the descendants of Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip are working royals. So let alone like the extended family. So just think about it as if your own family tree. You have your family, like your side of the family. So like example, my grandmother was one of seven. So there was like Stanley and Julia, my grandparents branch of the family. But then there was like six other kids and their branches of the family. Well, the Elizabeth and Philip branch is so big now that it's just the others aren't really needed as they once were. So they will inherit their titles because those are hereditary, but I don't think they will be working royals. And I think it's sad, that in the Windsor family, as in all families, one generation is leaving us and it will never be quite how it once was. I mean, example, all of the seven siblings of my grandmother, including herself, are all gone. And so it's just like a generation is gone and it's just never quite the same. So there's your history lesson for the day. I hope that made some kind of sense. But you hear about the Duke of Kent, the Duke of Gloucester, but you don't really know who they are. So hopefully you do now a little bit. And all of these descendants, by the way, have careers outside of the royal family. They're obviously still part of the family, as in like, the blood family, but no, they will not work for the firm I could have answered your question in one word, Vicky. I could have just said no, but I didn't. So there's your history lesson for the day.
Well, you've just further confirmed a lot of repeat names in this family for sure.
Oh yeah, it's like talking about Prince George dying in a plane crash. I'm like, wait, no, not that Prince George, and may it never be so. So yeah, that was confusing. I hope that made some kind of sense.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And there's a lot to think about here. I think as long as um this generation is here and staying close to the family, there may be times where they would be asked to attend something, or and we'll continue to see them probably at various events and in social circles. But like you said, Elizabeth and Phillips, their grandchildren, they're so big. If they wanted to expand and add additional working royals, they would probably start there first.
Right.
So I think that's good to call out. But I also wonder about these Duke titles. We hear them say that they're hereditary and they're passed down, but at some point they get so far away down the line. And this is something that I should research a little bit more. I don't know a whole lot about this. I think we've maybe speculated or talked about the what ifs at some point on the podcast, but I feel like there should be some sort of process where the monarch can bring the title back to the crown and then maybe redistribute at some point. And I think maybe we talked about this when we said Prince Edward is now Duke of Edinburgh, but could that go back to the crown and then Princess Charlotte be the Duchess of Edinburgh someday? Yeah. And we kind of explored that conversation. And so I feel like there's a world where that would make a lot of sense to me.
Right.
So I don't know. We'll see what happens in the future.
Yeah, again, that would have been much better explained in a visual medium, but I did the best I could. And it was interesting learning about these people because you hear the name Sophie Winkleman and you're like, I have no idea how she's related to this family. Well, now you do. So,
well, let's jump into royals around the world. We've got a lot in this segment today, too. So, Rachel, we have a royal jubilee coming up. This month, King Carl Gustaf of Sweden will celebrate 50 years on the throne for his golden jubilee, and it is quickly approaching. So any of our listeners who plan to be in Sweden this week, you should
this
week?
Yes.
Oh, if you're going to be there, you should probably already be planning your itinerary so you can join in on the celebration. But the 14th and 15th, there will be a procession through the streets of Stockholm. Then we'll see a performance at Drottningholm. Am I saying that right? Drottningholm Palace. And next we'll have a banquet at the Royal Palace of Stockholm. And that's where we actually might have a pretty good chance at seeing some royals in ball gowns and tiaras. So we'll have to be on the lookout for that this week.
Nice.
The king will also have some special guests in attendance. So this is super interesting. If you're wondering who we might expect to see, of course, we will see his wife, Queen Silvia. She'll be there alongside the king. We'll also see Queen Anne-Marie of Greece and Queen Margaret of Denmark, who both of these women are actually his first cousins.
I'm telling you, all the royals in Europe are related. All the royals in Europe are related somehow. I'm telling you.
And we're also expecting to see Crown Prince Frederick and Crown Princess Mary of Denmark. We talk about them a lot here. They'll be in attendance. It's being reported that King Harold and Queen Sonja of Norway will be there, along with Crown Prince Haakon and Crown Princess Mette-Marit. So we have a pretty glitzy royal event coming up soon. I think it's safe to say we'll also see Crown Princess Victoria, Princess Madeline, and Crown Prince Carl Phillip, which of course are the king's 3 children. So we'll look out for them as well. It doesn't sound like any of our British royals will be there unless we get some sort of surprise pop-up, but I kind of hate that. We did see them at the Jordanian royal wedding earlier this year. And I know it's been said before that when they attend these sorts of events, their status and popularity kind of steals the spotlight. So that could be a reason why they don't always attend these special events for other royals. And I don't know how true that is, but I just think it's so disappointing. I would love to see them all together and our British royals supporting other royals at their big events. Rachel, we saw so many of them at King Charles' coronation.
Right. I was just thinking that. Yeah.
So I would love to see that go the other way. But while we're on the subject of Sweden, the family actually released a new portrait, and I think that just came out the other day. But it includes the king and queen, Crown Princess Victoria and her family, Princess Madeline and her family, and Prince Carl Phillip and his family. So all in all, the photo has 16 people total, and that's the king and queen, their children and spouses, all of their 8 grandchildren. They did do a separate photo as well of King Carl Gustaf and the 2 heirs to the throne, which are his daughter, Crown Princess Victoria, and then her daughter, Princess Estelle. And that was such a great photo. I actually, if I'm remembering correctly, I think Princess Estelle, she was in a sort of pink and white plaid dress. I might have this wrong, but I feel like it might have been by self-portrait, which,
cool.
we've seen the Princess of Wales wear before.
Yeah, a lot actually.
So one more story for royals around the world this week. We mentioned last week that Princess Charlene had deleted her Instagram account. So we might not get to follow along with her photos anymore, but we do still get to see what the family is up to on occasion when we have official photos released or reporters share them online. So we got some this week. Prince Albert and Princess Charlene's children had their first day back at school. We got some first day photographs. As a reminder, their twins are 7. And I know I'm going to get this wrong.
Good luck with this.
The school they go to is Francois de Assis Nicholas Bar, which I think is a private Catholic school in Monaco.
Not bad at all.
I'm sure I got it wrong. But in the photo, the kids are they're pretty casual for a Catholic school. They've got tennis shoes, jeans, they've got red polo shirts on, and it's got the school's crest on the shirt. They also had their backpacks on, and Albert and Charlene were standing behind them smiling in the photo. So wishing them well back to school. What is it? The French say la rentrée. Is it that?
I have no idea. You obviously, you've proven in this episode that you speak a lot more French than I thought you did. So
I don't, but I do have getting close to 450 days straight on Duolingo.
Oh,
so
yeah, I forgot that you were doing that. I forgot you were learning French right now. That's so cool. What did you say? Pret-A-Manger? No, it's just the Pret. And by the way, speaking of Charlene, Charlene never gives interviews. She's pretty fiercely private, and she actually gave a really rare interview, and she talked about the twins' first day of school, talked about where she likes to go to escape. And Albert, I think, if I'm not mistaken, kind of speaking off the cuff here, but I think he gave an interview as well, and he was talking about how the constant rumors that barrage them about their marriage and how it's always falling apart, even though they've been married now for 12 years, how those hurt him. So interesting. Albert gives interviews on occasion, not super often, but Charlene never does. So it was interesting to see an interview with her. So very cool. Very cool. Well, shall we dive into our last segment of the week, which is Royal Deep Dive?
Let's go.
All right. Well, for today's Royal Deep Dive, we are going to focus on the hardest working royal, the Princess Royal herself, Princess Anne. And we're also going to touch briefly on both of her husbands. Well, not both of them. She's not a bigamist. Her former husband, Captain Mark Phillips, and her current husband, Vice Admiral Sir Timothy Lawrence. So, okay, let me tell you, Anne's story. Anne is one of the most fascinating royals. And though she is the Queen and Prince Philip's only daughter, She honestly is probably the toughest one of the bunch and the one most like her father, Prince Philip. So she was born Princess Anne Elizabeth Alice Louise on August 15th, 1950. So she just had a birthday. And she was born about 18 months before her mother became queen. She was born third in line to the throne. She is now 17th. And
Wow.
since 1987, when she was 36 years old, so our age, Jessica, she's been the Princess Royal. That is, the Princess Royal is an interesting title. It's a lifelong title that's given to the eldest daughter of the monarch, and why it took her so long to become Princess Royal, why it took her until she was 36 is because the Princess Royal before her was still alive. And even if
Oh.
yeah, and even if your parent is off the throne, you get to keep that title until you die. And so that's so eventually Princess Charlotte will likely be, maybe, I mean, if the timing matches up, likely be Princess Royal someday. So did you know, Jessica, that there have only been 7 Princess Royals ever, including Anne?
I did not know that. That's very interesting. And I didn't know that she had to wait to receive her title either.
Yep, yep. And she waited pretty long until she was 36 years old. She'd been a working royal for a long time by 1987. So she undertook her first royal engagement in 1969, which would have made her around was around 19, probably 18 or 19. And then on November 14th, 1973, which actually was her older brother Prince Charles's 25th birthday, she married Mark Phillips, who she met in 1968 at a party for horse lovers. What does a party for horse lovers look like? I will probably never know. So Mark is indeed that. He is a gold medal winning Olympian and a horseman. And their wedding was at Westminster Abbey. It was attended by 1,500 guests in person and watched by 100 million more on television. And when they married, Mark declined the customary earldom that was offered to him. And that is why their children, Peter and Zara, who we talked about in a prior episode of Royal Deep Dive, Peter born in 1977, Zara born in 1981. That's why they were born without titles. And if you want, again, if you want to learn all about the Phillips kids, go back a couple of episodes for their own Royal Deep Dive. So,
Well, okay. I feel like we always hear that Princess Anne's children didn't get titles because she chose for them not to have titles.
mhm.
But thinking about this, if her ex-husband declined his title, if he didn't want it, so that prevented the children from getting titles. I wonder if there's some sort of like, like she's like kind of, maybe she would have liked for them to have titles, and now she's like, well, you declined it, and so our kids couldn't have titles.
I think it was probably a pretty mutual
Oh.
decision. I think it was a pretty mutual
I
decision.
mean, I think we have talked a lot before on the podcast about how the decision to not give the children titles actually really benefited them in a lot of ways and allowed
Yeah.
them to have a different kind of freedom that they probably are totally fine with. But it is interesting to think about, had he not declined that
Mm.
title, would they have chosen for them to have them? So
Yeah, it is interesting. And by the way, I chose Anne for the Royal Deep Dive long before I knew that she was going to be on a podcast with William Kate and Mike Tindall this weekend. So it's just weird how, like, the ones I choose, it ends up being their birthday or something happening with them. It's kind of fortuitous. But anyway, Mark and Anne eventually separated in 1989. They divorced in 1992. I think this is interesting. Their divorce was finalized in 10 days, which seems extraordinarily quick to me. Like,
wow.
that's very fast. As we mentioned in the Peter and Zara deep dive, they separated in 1989, but Mark has a child that was born in, like, I think 1985. So there was like some stuff going on. But anyway, they got a divorce. And then within months of her divorce from Captain Phillips, Anne married Commander and then later Vice Admiral Timothy Lawrence, who she's still married to. She met him when he served as the Queen's equerry from 1986 to 1989. He served on the Royal Yacht Britannia. And they began kind of like, there's a lot of parallels randomly between Margaret and Anne, like kind of, sort of. They're not the same person, but that is how Margaret met Peter Townsend, is when he was an equerry as well. So but this worked out. It shows how much can happen in a generation of royals, because Margaret, who actually we will be doing the deep dive on Margaret next week, but Margaret couldn't marry Peter Townsend because he was divorced Anne was divorced and she could marry again, no problem. So Timothy, Lawrence, and Anne began dating in 1989. I think that's the same year that the Sun somehow got a hold of love letters between them and kind of outed them. Keep in mind that Anne and Mark were separated but not divorced yet. So Timothy and Anne married on December 12th, 1992 at Crathie Kirk in Scotland. Which is the church that Charles and Camilla have been going to all throughout their Balmoral stay. I find this interesting too. They chose to get married in Scotland because Scotland had a more accepting view of divorce than the Church of England did at the time in 1992. And there were only 30 people in attendance as opposed to her first wedding, which had 1,500. So talk about total juxtaposition. So let's back up a bit. So before Anne got married to Captain Phillips, and this was mentioned on The Crown, so this is not news, but Anne actually dated Andrew Parker Bowles in this weird love square between Charles and Camilla and Anne and Andrew. And then, of course, Andrew Parker Bowles goes on to marry a young woman named Camilla Shand right around the time that Anne married Mark. I think it was the same year, actually, 1973. So in 1976, Anne became the first member of the British royal family to compete in the Olympics. Her daughter went on to become an Olympian as well many years later. So Anne actually suffered a concussion halfway through the equestrian course, but she got back on the horse, literally, not even proverbially, and she remounted the horse and she finished the race. Backbone of steel here. And she has said that she can't remember making the rest of her jumps because she had a concussion. So, but that, I mean, you want to talk about tough woman, tough human being. So 2 years prior, I think this is one of the most this is a fascinating woman, okay? But this is one of the most fascinating anecdotes about Anne's life. So 2 years prior to her run at the Olympics, again, making her truly one of the most interesting royals of all time, Anne was a newlywed and she was part of a kidnapping attempt on March 20th, 1974. So a Ford Escort forced Mark and Anne's car to stop at the Mall as they were headed to Buckingham Palace. The driver of the Escort, whose name was Ian Ball, jumped out and began firing shots. He told Anne to get out of the car. I'm obsessed with this. Anne's classic response was not bloody likely. Like, that's amazing. And Anne was never shot, but I think 4 or 5 others were, and they were transported to the hospital. I think they all lived, but that's, again, terrifying. So Anne's ransom was set at around 2 or 3 million pounds. It's unclear exactly which of the two it was, but she later said that she was scrupulously polite to Ian Ball, as she thought it would be silly to be too rude at that stage. So the kidnapping, obviously everything worked out, everything's okay. The kidnapping attempt actually, and I think this is interesting too, actually inspired some of Tom Clancy's hit novel turned movie with, I think, Harrison Ford, called Patriot Games. So there's that royal trivia for you. So Anne is really content to keep her head down and work. She is consistently the royal that amasses the most number of engagements annually. She's patron of 300 organizations. That's so many. She's a mom of 2. She's a grandmother of 5. She has a couple of notable firsts that I would like to point out. So in addition to being the first Olympian in the family, in February 1987, she became the first royal family member to appear on a television quiz show. She was on the BBC's panel game, A Question of Sport. And this is hilarious to me as well. In November 2002, she became the first member of the royal family to be convicted of a criminal offense.
I remember this.
I do too. I had forgotten about it though, pleading guilty to one charge of having a dog dangerously out of control, which is an offense under the sorry, I can't. Which is an offense under the Dangerous Dogs Act of 1991. And she was fined 500 pounds. Oh my gosh.
Her dog attacked someone, didn't it?
I don't know. I mean, I don't mean to make light of this. Like, if her dog hurts someone, that's serious. But like, I just think it's funny that she just the Dangerous Dog Act of 1991 is funny.
I can't remember the details of the story, but I feel like it. Yeah, I mean, I think it might have bit someone, if I remember correctly. I need to go back and check.
I've got the giggles today anyway. So, okay, there's Princess Anne in a nutshell for you. I mean, talk about an interesting woman. I wish I had 1/100th the backbone that she does. And that is our royal deep dive for today. And I normally don't tease who I'm going to bring to the table next, but I've already said that next week is Princess Margaret. So get ready for that.
Right. Well, thanks for that fun little story. You're right. Anne is a fun royal to hear about. She's interesting and she's got a lot of cool experiences to talk about.
To say the least, right?
Well, we have had quite the episode today.
We've covered the gamut over here today.
So if there's anything left to talk about next week, then we'll be back. But I feel like we've pretty much covered the royals in full today. No, I'm sure they've got a whole new week of exciting activities coming up. So we'll share this episode out on Instagram with a recap of some of the stuff we've talked about this week. And then we'll be back next week with a fresh episode and more things to talk about. So thanks for hanging out with us today. Like I said, we're over on Instagram at Podcast Royal. Please go over there and follow us and engage with us on that platform. If you have questions for us that you want us to answer on the pod, or if you have any thoughts you want to share with us, you can either send us a DM on Instagram or you can email us at hellopodcastroyal@gmail.com. Please don't forget, if you love the show, go out there and leave us a 5-star rating and a kind review. We get so excited when we read those. And thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Podcast Royal. Bye.
Bye.